idea of psychological trauma is a sacred cow, and my culture eats meat. So I want to do my best in this talk and like honoring the kind of this sacred cow while also, I don't know, talking about being a carnivore or something like that.
Are we allowed to challenge here or say something?
Yeah, absolutely. So it'll be like all these talks. Like I mean, I've thought a lot about this. I've come up with some things, and of course, like there's just so much I don't know, and there's like so much wisdom in the whole. So there'll be a lot of room for that, and especially in the practice afterwards. Like, of course, like no one ever should just take what I'm saying as truth. You should always like run it by your own filters of like what's important, what's real, what matters, and like make your own decisions. So I'm offering something for you to consider, try on, and play with, and push up against. Some ways I often forget to say that because it seems so obvious to me that I don't, but I know it's actually important. And you may do the same thing. Like the title I've given to this is "The Problem with Trauma as a Meaning-Making Go-To and What to Do Instead." So you might have already generated some ideas of what you think I'll talk about, or what you might say if you were in my position talking to people. Like, if you haven't, you might take 15 seconds, 20 seconds right now to think about it. What are some issues you see with the way that culture is using this word?
I just asked someone newcomer, is there anything we're not allowed to talk about? There used to be in some Buddhist groups, and there's a lot of taboo things that we didn't want to talk about.
It's a really good question. There's not a simple answer for it. So the question was, is there anything we're not allowed to talk about? Especially in this hour, I'm going to do most of the talking, and I'm going to keep the attention mostly on like what I want to guide our awareness to. When we go into the more open-ended practice, you're invited to like your own leadership to bring what feels true and honest and real to you. And because everyone's invited into that, you'll get pretty clear and instant feedback. That doesn't mean that the feedback is right or good, but you'll at least get a sense of like how people are receiving what you're saying. So it kind of puts the onus back on you of like, rather than there being a rules, instead of particular rules of like, you can't talk about this and you can't talk about that, it's more like we have certain guidelines, like try to own your experience and take responsibility for yourself. And people will give you feedback beyond that. That's part of the practice, is kind of figuring out, like, yeah. So this is a little bit more specific. It's slightly less about circling, but the thing I see in circling culture is something I want to student write. Never knows this, and it helps me kind of like stay on track. So you should get used to that. First, I think it's important to say that I think there's like a variety of very real phenomena that psychological trauma is like a label that's like pointing towards. And I think that like this is like really, really good that this phenomena is coming into awareness. So I'm going to write that on the board because I want that to be really clear. Real phenomena. And it's like, I think it's good that like culture is talking, good that we're talking about it. Like we're talking about people being deeply overwhelmed and like having a sense of like not being able, like stuck in one point of view and all these other things.
Including PTSD?
I'm going to get to that in a second. So the other thing I was going to say, a few other things that are really important is like, I think the label can be like really, really helpful for a lot of people. This is the label I'm talking about, trauma. And I don't in any way want to like undercut the value or the help that this label is causing. Because I've even found it in my own like kind of frustration. I found like a place with a friend that was like challenging me, a place in me that I'm like, oh wow, I have psychological trauma that I wasn't willing to like admit and own, and found like a really tender, deep place I could be held, and like that I was, you know, shouldering all this burden and blah blah blah. So like I think it's super helpful. I also think one of the gifts is like huge gains in body awareness. This is one of the things I see this label giving, and this is like massive. I think it's not just body awareness in like my own self of like, oh wow, like I just noticed I'm dissociated, but also body awareness of others, like this kind of bringing into the cultural narrative, like, wait, someone might be in some sort of overwhelm. You start to notice like when someone's a bit glassy eyed, you're like, oh wait, I can't talk to them like I would talk to a normal, quiet, still person. And even though they're not like acting, throwing a big fit, like there might be something very intense going on inside them. So that is awesome. And last, I think the best psychological trauma theories and researchers are actually in a kind of deep collaboration with life and with the phenomenon. And that, I think that's the thing that really, at the end of this, what I want to say, I'm going to give you guys the punchline, and then we'll do our best to work our way there, is that what I think is a better way to live life is to see like the universe as a friendly place. I think it was Einstein that said that like the most important question for us to ask and answer is like, is the universe a friendly place? I think when we see it being a friendly place, it actually becomes a friendly place in our seeing it that way. And I think the best trauma therapies actually do this. So I'm a huge fan of NARM, the neuroaffective relational model of trauma therapy. I think Peter Levine's somatic experiencing is really good. I think Daniel Siegel's stuff on interpersonal neurobiology is really good. The like polyvagal theory, I think, has added a lot to this. So like, there's a lot of wisdom that I don't even know. I can like name the right names, and I've like read books and stuff, but I know there's like a lot there. I think a lot of these guys are really doing good work. So just want to hold all of that as like a deep honoring before I say anything else. Any questions on that? Does that make sense?
I'm trying to get with you about that list you just read off later.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I can, yeah, good call. Okay, now for the next phase. What is this? A cup, a mug, what else? Container, a vessel, an object, a paperweight, something I might use as a metaphor. Exactly. And yeah, exactly. A collection of atoms, a hammer, a weapon,
Empty coffee cup.
an empty coffee cup. All of those things seem true, right? All are true. Yet one that everyone goes to most naturally, a cup, is because it's basically the most useful. So like, there's a bunch of labels. They're all right. They're all true relatively. And a particular label happens to be the most useful the most time. This is what I want to say basically, is that like, what label you choose actually guides how you use it. So if we call it like an object of meditation, we're less likely to put coffee in it. If we call it a hammer, we're more likely to hit stuff with it, right? We could still put coffee in it for sure, but like the label matters in how we use it. And this is why it really matters to me, like why I'm like, okay, this is worth spending an hour talking about. Like this label trauma is going to guide our awareness and the way that we interact with each other in a really important way. And I want to make sure that we're doing it in the way that's most useful. So, and I actually think that we as a community of practitioners can kind of lead the charge on this. Like psychological trauma is not just something that's showing up in like personal development culture. Like because of memes and Facebook and all these things, I think like I've heard people I would not have expected talking about this. So I think there's a chance to kind of like lead socially, like the way we use these words, that's more helpful and more meaningful and more collaborative with life and the universe as a friendly place. So yeah, the first issue, I think, I want to acknowledge I haven't even defined what the hell does this word mean? Like, what am I talking about? I think this is one of the problems. So I think like the first issue that I want to draw attention to is a kind of lack of distinction. So there's like physical trauma, which is basically a severe or sudden physical injury caused by external force, right? And there's like sudden, like there's a sudden version of trauma, and then there's also the severe version of trauma. If you go to an ER, like they know that if you say like trauma, it could be like one kind or it could be the other kind, but you're talking about like physical, like blunt force trauma, right? That's really, really different from psychological trauma. There's already other distinctions there. So there's like shock trauma, which is like, man, I got into like a car accident and like I just found myself like, you know, shaking and like automatically without even thinking about it, getting out the passenger side door and then like crushing a bottle of water that someone handed to me with like, because there's so much adrenaline coursing through my body. And there's this kind of like, there's just one event that just boom, like shocks my systems, overwhelming. I can't face it. And so then it comes back in these various ways. But there's a different kind of trauma, psychological trauma, that is more like often we call like developmental trauma. And there's like different categories there. There's like developmental trauma that's basically things that happen, instead of being a thing that happens to you, it's a thing that doesn't happen to you. And we can separate that into more definitions. Like, oh, well, one thing that didn't happen to you is you didn't get your needs met. One thing that didn't happen to you is you didn't have a chance to like live your own life. You're always in the shadow of something else, your parents' expectations or whatever. So this, I think it's fine. Like, I think Google Maps is a really good example of like, you don't always want the like, you don't always want to go, like if I'm planning a road trip from here to California, like I don't want to only look at the Austin map. Like I don't want all of those distinctions. It's like helpful to be able to zoom out and just call stuff in a big bucket. Oh yeah, trauma. But I think what happens is that when we're in, and so like it makes sense in certain conversations, but I'd say most conversations we need more distinction, because most of the time, like in circling, when I hear people talk about it, they're like navigating the equivalent of city streets. So they need to know like the left turn and the right turn, not like which interstate to take for the next 13 hours. And those left turn, right turns, like I don't even think the labels of like, if we went into those very, very rigorous and specific distinctions, often they're not as helpful as like what's happening right now? What do you feel? What are you aware of? What's happening in me? Where's my attention go? Those are investigating like what's occurring in awareness. That makes sense. I think this is the first thing I'd ask, or I'm going to go into solutions, what to do instead afterwards.
They're much better signposts
than just saying trauma. So for example, like what's actually happening when, like I might be like, oh well, wow, I'm experiencing my trauma. And then suddenly everyone's like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to do something because he like signaled a thing that like socially means something else. And I don't know what to do. And like suddenly I'm like freaking out and all this stuff. Instead, I might be like, wait, I'm experiencing some sort of like tension in my back. Find myself like unable to look up and like make eye contact with anyone, etc. Like there's actual in the moment phenomena that are occurring. And I think most of the time the label is actually lazy. In a way that's unhelpful. That was scary to say. See how the online people are doing. We broadcast this to our Circle Anywhere community. It's like an online circling community. So there's a few people online that are playing along, and we're just checking to see how they're doing.
There's something in it seems like in a way that's also kind of just the ability to pull the cord on a train. Like, there's something going on and I need to stop. I don't have the vocabulary to say what's happening or even how serious it is. I just know, whoa, I'm unable. So there's something, it's an interesting, right, and hearing what you're saying and the complexity of knowing how to name what's happening.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's part of what we do coming here is like, it's so hard. I have one of my friends' daughters texts me every once in a while and like just bad stuff that's going on. And she was like, I have no idea how to like talk about my emotions. Like, it's just like, I know stuff's happening, but I don't know what to name it. And I'm like, totally, like that happens to me literally every day. Like, and this is my job to like talk about and name emotions. So that, but yeah, I think it's more in general more helpful to be like, I have something happening. I don't know exactly what it is. It's hard to name, than to like grab for a label that may be like really indistinct and might bring with it a bunch of other stuff that isn't going to be helpful. Okay. Next, I think that the label as a habit. Again, I don't want to criticize the label altogether. I think there's a real phenomenon that like is good that we're becoming an awareness, but the habit of going to it all the time to make meaning of what's happening, which is something I do see occur. And there's something natural about humans. Like whenever we learn something new, like we just want to do it over and over again. That's fine. But I'm like, okay, we're learning a new thing, and let's be aware of it. So the habit of going to it automatically, I think, doesn't honor the gift that the experience that people call whatever the traumatic thing often gives. So
Can you be more specific?
I'm about to, yeah, thank you. So do you guys know the X-Men? Does anyone not know about X-Men? They're like superheroes. I love superheroes. And they're superheroes, and they're basically, the idea is that there's like a gene mutation that gives somebody like some sort of crazy awesome power. Like they can like produce fire out of nowhere, or they have like telepathy or something. But what's amazing is that like the like psychic power that they develop always happens as a result of some like super intense event happening in their life. So they mutate in response to like basically a shitty situation. So like Colossus turns into metal, and he did that because he like jumped in front of a tractor to save his sister, and stuff like that, right? So like the idea is like, oh yeah, his body like it's like sped up evolution or something like that. And what's so cool is that like most of them, they call them mutants in the X-Men world, and like most of the mutants think that they're like totally deformed. And it makes sense because they're like, they have some weird power they don't know how to use, and they like hurt everyone around them when like they try to like whatever, like do fire or do telepathy. They just hurt everyone. And so they're like, they run away and they're outcasts. They come to Professor X's school, and he's like, hey, guess what? Like, you're not a mutant in a bad way. You're not like a terrible person. Like, learn that this is like an amazing gift that you can help people with. And of course, like in the story, there's another guy. It's like, there's all sorts of other things going on. But the point is, this terrible event created a mutation that gives them a certain power that does indeed hurt people at first until they learn to use it. And I think when people talk about psychological trauma, they're talking about usually something that happened that was pretty painful, that like the self system didn't have the capacity to like deal with or integrate, and we developed some sort of adaptation to survive. And I'm arguing that this adaptation is often a gift. There's some sort of like psychic power, usually. And without getting too weird, it's like if my dad was always like flying off the handle, I get like really attuned to anger. And it's like, I just, better than almost anyone else in the world, I can predict when someone's about to be angry and like fly off the handle. And that's like a kind of like what I'm calling like a psychic power. That's like my X-Men mutation. So when we label it and we don't see that like, wow, there's actually some beautiful gift. We miss honoring like just the amazingness of life. We miss that thing of life being collaborative. Yeah. Anyone want to share something about that? Yeah.
I have a question. What do you mean by collaborative? Like something more than just people working together or something else?
Yeah, I really mean like the life itself. I think I should get into that later, but I really mean life itself being in collaboration with you as an individual, not just people, but like your adaptation to something really rough happening. I mean, and there's certain things like this doesn't mean that this wasn't a horrible situation that you wouldn't wish on anyone else in the world ever. And I think a good example, like in a lot of like traditional tribal cultures, there was some sort of like initiation ceremony that people would go through to become like a man or a woman in that society. And like there's a famous one where like the men have to stick their hand in a glove of bullet ants. And it's like, it's totally traumatic and it's like totally vicious. And they wouldn't, in a certain sense, like you would never want anyone else to like have to go through that experience. And yet, like when they see it as an initiation, it's like, yeah, this makes me who I am, and it does change me. I'm never again the same. Something about like that you can actually claim it and own it as something that was like really meaningful, even though it was fucking painful. It was terrible. I don't want anyone else to ever have to go through that. It's shaped me to be who I am. And in that sense, it's been a gift.
I hear you on this, and it applies to some things that I might qualify as trauma, and it seems really challenging to apply to other things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think the challenge is worth it.
Totally. It seems like something probably like not discussed here, but like that I want to like take to my therapist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get two more hands, then I'm gonna keep going. I have like 6 points and then better options. So I keep jumping ahead to the better options, but what were you gonna say?
If I were to focus the response for the sake of being compact, I heard you mention collaboration and application, and we talked about initiation as an example, and I was reminded that when initiation ceremonies happen are usually a tribal experience. When some sort of ceremony like this happens, there's a lot of preparation that goes into it with the community beforehand. The understanding is the community might be there to provide things for you afterwards. The community might be there before to provide information for you, and so thus the collaboration is literal. Even though during the initiation you might be alone, the comparison to what you were describing feels hard to make work because in at least some traumatic situations, what is happening in the community that is not even necessarily aware of what the experience is, let alone equipped to provide any sort of supportive resources either before or after the event or in any way, whatever. And it's hard to differentiate the assertion that collaboration is a part of this perspective when I have really positive experiences. What was really important was personal responsibility, and it wasn't really a thing that was common to allow for trauma as a meaning-making thing because of that, because self-reliance was more important. So there wouldn't be a context where a community would draw together there either, and it sounds very similar to me in this moment now, what you're saying and what they have said, and there's benefits there, I feel like, personal responsibility, but I find it hard to say that it's a collaborative stance.
Totally. I think I hear what you're saying. And I think I could have another board up and say like the problem with self-responsibility or radical self-responsibility as a meaning-making go-to, and like come up with like, 6 other things that like are problematic and what we could do instead. So I think you're right. My worry is that that we actually like just the same way like this, like we can like there's a phenomenon that's super painful or whatever, and like the label matters, that if we go too quickly to like trying to give it this particular label, we actually miss the full capacity of like to be like, yeah, we can call this an initiation and support you massively because of that. It's just a different attitude. So let's see if that gets addressed in the next few points, and if not, we can come back to it. And let's get, sorry, it was you next, I think.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I really resonate with this point, the gift of it. I've seen that. One of the things that has me just generally curious is so when I look at my own family system, I see this fork in the road. My mother grew up with some of the most like horrific imaginable childhoods. It was crazy. Her sister, who went through the same stuff, ended up with multiple personalities and eventually committed suicide. And her son is now in prison for life. So like I've watched that get handed down. My mother somehow took the same trauma and like something happened and she made it a gift. And she's among the most compassionate people I know. And she took that trauma and said, I'm going to use this to break this cycle and raise my child differently, which I benefited from immensely. She was among the best parents I could imagine. And it's interesting to see that fork. Her and her sister were so similar and had the same experiences. And one of them went to, up there, and then my mother turned into like, she's now a hospice worker. She's just an amazing heart. And it's like, wow.
Right, and like, what is that? And maybe the community is a huge piece of that.
Yeah.
So that'd be interesting to look at. Definitely wouldn't want to throw that out. Let's get your comment,
Yeah,
and then we'll
so
keep going.
great. I loved both of your comments. There were more comments than questions, really. And as a trauma therapist and someone who experienced what might be called trauma in my childhood, I'm thinking that, and knowing you, Jordan, I don't disagree with any of these points. And it feels like it's a very, yes, there is a gift. Like I went through trauma in my childhood and I'm able to have deeper compassion for the kid whose best friend was murdered last week, and there's a dark side. So I think I see you as you generally do, which I love about you, going to the brighter side of, or the more positive side, the loving world side of things. And a lot of trauma, especially with the kids I work with, it's kept, they're alone in it. And it is dark. And they're not seeing the bright side of things.
Right. So if I can make my point more clear, we may just end up disagreeing on this. It's I would like, if I'm in my world, I'm not even going to call what they're going through trauma. I'm going to say, man, this person went through a fucking horrible experience. Their best friend got murdered, and I definitely have to be with the pain of that, like fully, because I don't know what that does to a young self-information, and it's certainly going to be great, like going to be something. Their life is going to be super unique and different from everyone else's. But when I hold the possibility that like that different direction, that like when I compare like that kid that didn't have their best friend murdered, at like when I hold the possibility that they may get something like some meaningful, that it could be character or as well as all of it, then I can help when they do have even a spark of like natural, like, wait, maybe there's something, I can actually support that. I can be looking for that and help them see it doesn't in any way mean it's not horrible or dark or whatever. It's just that like, if I jump to that conclusion of like, I just don't hear very often. Yeah, so I just want to bring this more into the narrative. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so this is in a similar vein. I think one problem is that there's a mentality of pathologizing.
Ooh.
So what I mean by that is like that since the word itself is like associated with this like, yeah, basically like having an actual like wound, there's some sense that like there's something wrong that we have to fix. And I think that there's a few problems with that. The first one is like, reminds me of my sister's dog, and some of you have heard me talk about this before, but her name was Denali, and she was a Katrina rescue. So there's a hurricane, and they think that she was in a junkyard, and she was like totally abused. My sister got her very young, I think 6 weeks old or 8 weeks old, and she was already like super scared of basically all men, people, but especially men. And now she's had this dog for 11 years, and she's still scared of people, and she's still scared of most men, at least at first. She loves me, like we've known each other for a very long time, so she can like warm up to people. And I think she has a really, really good life. This, like, she goes and plays the dog park. I mean, if you see this dog, or especially once you've gotten to know her and she's not scared of you, you see that she's like really loving life. She's never going to heal that trauma. We use that word. I mean, she's never going to heal this incredibly intense impression that like men are dangerous unless they earn trust. And people are probably dangerous unless they deeply earn trust. And that doesn't mean she can't live a really good life. And I worry sometimes that when I hear people be like, oh, fuck, like I need to like heal my trauma, that like they think that they can't enjoy life until they've done enough therapy to like get through the like, you know, history that created the like horrible person they are today. And I'm like, whoa, hold on. Like, I mean, that's an extreme version. Most people aren't in that extreme. But I think there's another thing that the mentality of pathologizing does that's particularly missing an amazing potential that we see in circling, and that's that we can actually find a place of intimacy in trauma. So when, like what I've seen over and over, so when somebody like goes into a freeze, for example, you're like basically like, well, I'm frozen because I can't, my body system, my body mind psyche can't handle whatever's occurring in my current reality. And so if I think that like, oh, I got to fix this problem because it's like pathological, I miss that I can actually just be intimate with that experience of freeze, which is not only like probably pretty common for them, but there's also, it like touches a kind of like intelligence that goes like straight to some of their like deepest intimacy, basically the places that they're it's like a blueprint to an essence, or like a character forming part of their being. And it's something that we can actually go into and like celebrate and honor. And maybe you only want to do that with your therapist. I'm not saying that we should all just go into this whenever, but it's something to note that like, yeah, like it's often like there's something amazing and beautiful right there, like right there. And I thought of an example of this. So, you know, sometimes you'll see like this silly example. Forgive me for my like stupidness, but like, you know those like you'll see like a palm tree that like is like growing sideways, and then like it like turns a 90-degree angle and goes up, and you're like, man, that's like the most beautiful palm tree. But like basically that's like super awkward, right? Like trees don't grow at 90-degree angles, and like it couldn't. It's like I often see it as that like. It's not pathological that tree turned a 90-degree angle or it came out sideways and did that. It's like the most epic place to take it. And I say forgive me because I know that like we've probably all been through some like really like those 90 degrees in our psyches are like actually super intense and like painful and like hard to touch. So I want to honor that while also like allowing some of the silliness. Are we good so far? Next, I think we have to move a little quicker. One thing that I see can be problematic of this as trauma as a meaning-making go-to, not necessarily just as trauma itself, is that it can generate a sense of specialness.
Ooh. Sacred cow.
Yeah, I think people basically build an identity. As someone who's been traumatized, it's very, very difficult to shake. And part of the reason it's difficult to shake it because it's like, I'm a blank, therefore I need special treatment. Yeah, for sure. I mean, and the other thing is like just you work with, like, I'm really not talking about the people you're working with. Like, I really don't think I'm talking about the people you're working with. I'm talking about like more like just this like cultural habit of like every like rough thing in someone's life is something that like needs to be treated in like a really special way, and like and the problem is actually not, to me, like one of the biggest problems with this is not that like, oh, you shouldn't treat people specially. It's that you don't need the excuse. Like, if you need to be treated a certain way, you can just ask for it. In my world, like, you don't need any justification. If you want people to be gentle with you, I'm down with that. If you want people to like, if you only want to hang out with people that like don't say curse words, like, man, that I'm all for that. So like, you don't need to be like, I have a special thing that like, because I was, triggered in XYZ way, I now need you to act a special way around me. You can just simply say like, hey, will you not do that? That's the world I want to create. And I'm worried that if we go to this as habitually, that we go further and further away from the world of like, man, we can just ask for what we want, and like people will negotiate. And sometimes they won't be able to give it, and sometimes like friendships will end, and that's okay because new friendships will begin, and like life will go on. My belly's going crazy now, so I'm guessing some people really don't like this point, or I'm just projecting my own insecurity on y'all. Let's get back.
I'm remembering earlier today when we had this thing with like somebody turned the lights off. We're like, oh, we want the lights on. And they're like, no, this person is light sensitive. And then we're just like, oh yeah, okay, never mind. Let's turn the lights off. And that's like, that feels like this is violating that thing. But like I feel it in myself, like without knowing that the person is light sensitive, I'm way less willing to take their way.
Here's the thing. In some trauma research, we'd be like, oh, that light sensitivity is definitely a result of the connection trauma. It's the connection survival style. It's like, and I could have gone into all of that, and we just flat out didn't need that. I could simply say like, hey, this person's light sensitive. They're like, can we just have the lights off? Is everyone okay with that? All right, good. Next, boom, done. We didn't need the label.
The label of light sensitive.
We didn't need the label of a developmental connection trauma history in order to like keep the lights off. We could just ask for what they needed. It was simple.
That's a very evolved state.
Totally. I'm asking for an evolved world. Like, that's what we're here doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's fabulous. And
Yeah. Okay. So one way to think of this would be, this is another, I'm sorry I have these ridiculous examples, but one way to think of this that I think still honors a kind of healing paradigm is more like, I have student loans than like I have this sense of self as someone that like I am traumatized. It's like, yeah, I have this issue from my past that continues to affect me. And it might affect me for a really long time because I'm not paying it off, because I'm not like, I don't have a big like interest rate yet. But at some point I know that I'm gonna have to pay off these loans. Like, when that happens, I have energy that I need to work on it, and that's fine. Does that make sense? That's an alternative to the specialness thingy.
I just, when I hear student loans, I think about a choice. Compare that to a traumatic event, or like feels like problematic. I mean,
You're probably right. The metaphor. Let's come up with a better metaphor for the next time I do this. That's more honors the lack of choice in the initial occurrence.
going back to the lights dimming, a person who's organizing events has the power to make choices about how they advertise the event, how they host the event, how they communicate with people, that can incorporate who might turn up if they're thinking about a label. If they're thinking like, I might have light sensitive people at this event, they can say, if anyone has any needs that we can address in this room, be welcome to share it. saying it that way is mindful of a person who may not necessarily know that they have this invitation, who may not necessarily be as involved, or may not necessarily be as able. And the person who has the power to have the event, if that person is completely absolved of any responsibility of joining in and acknowledging the label, it feels like there's a missed opportunity for that collaboration that we were talking about earlier.
I want to just check, because I have to keep us on track. Oh, I don't have to, but I want to keep us on track. Is the problem you have more with the metaphor, or like the idea that like having a habit of using this label can generate a sense of specialness?
If I really want to pinpoint it, I want to say I'm remembering a moment where you said, I'm not talking about your clients. And I had a question that I didn't ask, and this was on me, I should have asked. Who else are we not talking about? Was the question. For context. It could be that you're not talking about a whole host of people that I don't realize you're not talking about, and then maybe my question is, well, my confusion is moved.
I would love you guys to figure out who I'm talking, like who I'm talking about for you. Does that make sense? So like, I don't, at the moment, I'm not making any claims. I mean, I did with the trauma therapist, like that. Probably she knows her clients a million times better than I do. So she's way more, I don't know. She will know better if I'm talking about her clients or not. And so I'd ask the same thing for y'all. Like, you can probably see in your life, like at least someone, maybe yourself, but someone that these things apply to. And if not, then maybe this talk is not useful for you and you don't need to bother with it. But it's more like I want to put this idea out there that can germinate, and then you see, does it grow in your garden? Like, maybe not. Maybe there's not enough. Maybe it's not the right thing for you. Does that answer that question? Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't tell if you were asking a question or just doing.
Yeah. There's something you were saying with the metaphor of the student loans. It seems like it's pointing to something about provisional truth.
Say more about provisional truth.
The truth we need to navigate our current circumstances that might actually be actual truth, and will change as we open up our view and work with our stuff.
So you're saying that points to something where like there's a truth that we might need in the moment to navigate something that's not making an absolute claim on reality. It's just like, this is useful to get. It's like, let's use crutches while we have a thing, and then we take the crutches away. Is that? No. Yeah. Nice. Sashi, what were you going to say?
I think there can be spiritual bypassing sometimes, and I just would like you to talk about spiritual bypassing.
That'll be another. I'm going to put this on the board because it's just like, I don't know. I can talk about it for a moment.
Spiritual bypassing, but I think also not everyone has the capability to make the cognitive, because it's in the trauma's in the nervous system, it's in the body. There are certain patterns that have been formed, and so to just sort of like say, okay, I'm going to switch my cognition is one piece of it, but the nervous system piece of it is the body. It's embedded in every cell or in the nervous system, and there are certain patterns that have been crystallized that are not going to just respond to like a shift of a belief or a view. And it's somatic and it's patterned.
So the thing Sashi's saying is like there's a nervous, and I'm trying to repeat it. I don't remember the exact words. Partially because I know we're a bigger crowd, maybe you didn't hear it. Partially for the online audience. Partially because I'm getting better as a presenter, and partially to see that so that you know that you've been heard at least. So it seems like there's part of what we're talking about is there's like a state of being that somebody gets into where the kind of the body intelligence takes over. So it's like when you like, you've probably all been in some situation that was like close to life or death, and it's like your body just knew what to do. So it's like we have this like really intelligent body system that can like run away from stuff or like fight when we need to or whatever. And that in those moments, like a lot of times that system is activated that we don't, when it's like, doesn't need to be per se, but like when that system is activated, it's got the steering wheel, and so it's like you can't just suddenly like put in a new belief, and then like that system is going to let go of the steering wheel. Is that the?
And just a little bit about the spiritual life.
Let's wait on that. Let's see where we get, because we got it on the board. We can come back to it. So I think this actually takes me to my next point, which is great. So thank you. And that is that the label itself is not inarguable. And as such, what I usually see is that it's I'm going to come back to, I think it'll make sense why I'm saying it's related. It usually is like a demand to be treated a certain way. And it's like the ones that I'm talking about is when there's like a self-righteousness to it. And like if I'm not treated that way, then like you're a bad person and you should be shamed or kicked out of the tribe or something, right? And do you guys, have you all experienced that at some point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jordan, can you include the self-to-self nature of that?
Probably not. It has to include the self-to-self nature of that.
Meaning, not I'm asking you to treat me away because of trauma, but the way I treat myself or not.
Sure. So one of the things we do in circling is we basically try to go as close as we can to inarguable truth, and we call this owning your experience. So it's like, what's really happening? Like what's really going on for me in this moment? Like you're feeling stuff, and maybe you're in fact, like right now, maybe your nervous system is activated because here's this guy. Maybe he knows what he's talking about. Maybe he doesn't. He's saying a bunch of shit. Some of it is like aggressive or like challenging, like something, and you might be like wanting to fight back, and you'll have like a body resonance to that. So like one way to do it is to like, tell me I'm wrong, which thankfully no one has done yet. That does happen occasionally, and often I'm wrong, and those people are right. But what we try to do in circling is like go to like what's the raw in the moment sensation? What's the truest truth that I can find about what's occurring right now? And let me like see if I can speak that. And what often happens, the thing that Matt's talking about, is a lot of times like the demands we're making on others to like be a certain way, like, hey, I need you to be whatever with me, is something we haven't learned to do for ourselves. And once we learn to do it for ourselves, we stop needing other people to be different. It's just like we don't necessarily circle to get that outcome, but it's just a constant outcome of circling. You're like, oh shit, like I realize I have a freedom that I wasn't aware of, that I can treat myself a certain way, which might involve me leaving, or might involve me whatever, like doing something, I don't know, yeah, I looked at you and thought going to a trauma therapist, but don't know why I was thinking that. So then I was like, should I say that? Here I am doing the meta reporting because I don't know, it's a go-to. It makes me feel safe. Yeah. So I think that's something I noticed that people, well, like basically like now that I've said I'm in a traumatic state, I don't really like, there's a certain way that I need to be, and I'm not really like bothering to own anymore because my nervous system has taken over, and it's like, wait, no, hold on, like this is like a huge opportunity to like really be with what's occurring, and I think you can start to build a habit. And this is actually interesting. Trauma therapy is like building the habit of like holding the awareness of like, this is the reality I'm in, and this is the way my body's reacting, and they're different, and that's okay. I can just be with it, and so you actually start to claim more more grounding or more reality for yourself in a way that gives you more freedom to navigate the world. And the irony that I'm pointing out here is I worry that sometimes when people go to have the habit of this as a meaning-making thing, they move away from that freedom. And it's so frustrating to me because the whole point of the label is so they can have the freedom. I'm like, come on, you're like shooting yourself in the foot. And I think a better strategy, and I'm jumping ahead of myself again, is to just like actually like stay with the immediacy of what's occurring. Okay, Next point. I think that as a habit, again, not every time, like definitely know there's like tons of really good stuff going. All these points are still here. I'm saying that because I'm scared. I hope you know that. I'm not saying that because of you. Is that as a habit, I can often find it being very disempowering. It's again a frustration because I think the whole point is to try to empower people. So to illustrate this, you guys may or may not have heard of this thing, but like we have like it's from transactional analysis, we have this thing that this guy noticed happens a lot. So it's a useful way of understanding the world. So I'm not saying it's like always true or whatever, but they're like we get into these roles on this triangle that are like scripts that we just run, and then we just keep moving around the triangle, like both in ourselves, like we have these three voices, and like out there in the world. And these roles, they call it the drama triangle because it just perpetuates drama. And so the roles in the trauma world is you have like the traumatized victim. Okay. You have the past event or absence that is oppressing them. And then you have maybe the circler or the like, I don't know, the healer, the informed work, the trauma-informed worker that's going to save them. And when you put like exactly because it's hard, like when you're in that state to like, it's very hard to like make meaning of what's going on. If you like put somebody in these labels or you give them these things, like you can accidentally, with the best intentions, like consign them to like just endlessly running around this thing. And I really get frustrated. The same thing happens with the poor person being re-traumatized. Like using this label, I'm like, oh man, like, look, Becky's on the floor because like she's being re-traumatized by like a male telling her the way things are, or something like that, right? And like, yeah, she's being re-traumatized. I am the current re-traumatizer because I'm the male dude that's oppressing her, whatever. And the savior is the person who like calls it out and is like, hey, you need to stop talking in front of the room because you're re-traumatizing Becky. Right? So the trouble with this is that I'm saying like it's not to say that sometimes you don't need to stop stuff that's happening. Like you absolutely, like there's a time and a place for that. But like when we have this kind of habitual way of going into this, the problem is that like it doesn't give them a way out. Like that's the way this thing works, is that when you're like, oh, it's like this is an oppressor, and this is like you always have to rely on the savior. You always have to like blame these other people, and the person who actually has some real pain and trouble like doesn't find a way to claim their own capacity to like move forward and make meaning and like be okay in the world. And that's actually what I think we all want. Like that's what we're moving towards.
Being triggered, and this is happening around you, interface with someone who's in one of those.
That is a good question that we're going to go to at the end, because we're going to come back. I want to see. Oh my God, it's 7:15 already.
Oh my gosh.
I'm going to see if I can move really quickly through the mile. I did kind of hint at the alternatives, but my suggestion, I hate to just criticize something without offering alternatives. I think it's really, it just pisses me off, to be honest. It's just a pet peeve. And I know sometimes it's the best we got. Like we just got to bring critique because something feels off and we don't have any other good solutions. But I'm like, come on, let's try to offer something. And you guys will probably have better somethings that will come as a result of this, and then you can let me know, and I'll include it in the next iteration of this. Okay, so and also because we're lack of time, I think we're gonna let the online group just have their own discussion as they're going. I'm sorry, I'm not doing questions there. What to do instead of, what to do instead of a lack of distinction? I'd say just be more precise about what's occurring in you. So that means, yeah, in body, in spirit, in mind, in awareness, and intuition, in the group. In circling, we do this with like owning our experience. We do it with staying with sensation. We do it with being with the other. We're like using these 5 principles, which actually come from, they are, my business partner said, created these principles. Like I've gone through the NARM training, and that's part of why I love it. Next, instead of honoring the gift, it's pretty simple. I'd say just notice and appreciate the gift. And again, this is something we already do in circling really well, and that's the spirit of like being with what's there. And like people so often are like, oh, I just want to get out of this or do that, and we're like, okay, well, hold on, like just before that makes sense, but like, you know, what has you wanting to get out? Or like, what's, you know, we start to just go in and naturally honor it. Instead of the mentality of pathology, I would suggest that we have an attitude of life collaborating to liberate us. So, does that make sense? To liberate us. Oh, good thing you can read my handwriting. It's awesome. Instead of generating specialness, I'd say recognize the universality or the connection of what's happening. Like, man, we're all going through some rough shit all the time. I forget who it is, this famous quote, like, be kind, for everyone you know is fighting a hard battle. Another version of that would be to stay as awareness, like to stay in awareness and notice that like life is change, and it's like this too shall pass. I didn't write that one down. Notice connection is one way to say it, and that could be your connection to God, for example. When it's not inarguable, my offer is to speak in the first person, not the third person. So whenever I'm like applying a label, oh, I am boom label, this is my PTSD, whatever, and I'm actually in the third person, even though I've said I, like I'm describing an objective reality. And my encouragement is to go back to the subjective and just say what's actually occurring in your subjective experience. An option, first person. And instead of the disempowerment, that's what your question was. I would say consider this the curriculum. Consider yourself as a potential mentor or guide, or fellow student would be even better. You guys are gonna like do a study session together, and then you or whoever is someone who chooses, who's a learner, learner maybe better, and you don't have to, like, if you start trying to make someone else see this, you get back on on the drama version. So it's more like you start to see that what's happening is a curricular element that's growing them, that's allowing them or yourself to be, that they have a choice, whether or not they're aware of it, that there is a choice.
John,
Oh, awesome.
who's gonna help me?
Yeah.
You? Are you in the middle of something now?
We're just wrapping up.
Oh, okay.
There's a guy we have a really crappy wheelchair access. So can one or two people go out and help a guy?
I brought a little portable ramp.
Awesome. That's super helpful. Yeah. Amen. So yeah, and I think this goes to like the overall point I'm trying to get to that I'm now going really late on, which is that like, even though I think we very rarely get to choose what happens to us, we do get to choose like what sense we make of what happens. And I think choosing to see life as unfolding in a positive direction, and even the bad stuff that happens as like curricular elements or challenges to show us our character, we actually get a richer, more collaborative experience of life. I heard a story once of Nelson Mandela, of somebody being like, man, 27 years in prison. And he's like, yeah, it's plenty of time to teach a guard to read. So even in those like pretty crappy circumstances, like he made something meaningful out of it. And yeah, I think if we build a habit of seeing the universe as a friendly place and keep kind of checking with what's actually occurring in the moment, that it'll actually become the thing that we're seeing it as, in a kind of, maybe just because of confirmation bias, but I think there's something deeper at play. And I think if you do the experiment, and everyone who seems to have ever done that experiment tends to agree that the results bear it out. So that's the problem with trauma as a meaning-making go-to, and what to do instead. Thank you. We'll take a few minutes to use the restroom and move around, and then we'll come back and do some circling. Thanks for coming.
Thanks so much for this.
Yeah.
I have a lot to
Love you, tons.
say to you about it.
Good. Yeah, I figured you would. I'll probably learn a lot. Yeah, you too.
I love to get coffee with you sometime and just.
And go back and forth about this.
Or something. Grab something. Anything.